We've seen lots of changes in UK workplaces. Across the board, we're seeing some dissatisfaction growing in many aspects of work, and perhaps that's not unrelated to the more recent problems in the labour market and the economy more generally. In the longer run, we've seen greater intensification of work, and that's something which is that labour economists have looked at and industrial relations experts have looked at in some detail over the last few years. Clearly, there's a growth in pressure at work. We've seen a big increase, which is tailing off a bit in terms of working hours, and obviously greater pressure to provide both more and more timely outputs, but also there's still organisations who manage inputs very heavily as well. So it's not just what you produce, but how you do it and when you do it. And that can undermine people's sense of satisfaction. We've also seen a decline in autonomy. Now, I think this is worrying for all sorts of reasons. The first thing really is, I suppose, and again, David McLeod alluded to this a bit earlier, we have a very highly educated workforce. 20, 30 years ago, there are 60, 70% of people who had no qualifications at all, or virtually no qualifications. That's flipped over. So we now have 30% of the workforce who are graduates, and that's growing. We have more people with qualifications. And David was right, they're not semi-literate automata who will just do as they're told anymore. So there's a growing need for consent, whilst at the same time we're seeing a reduction in the reported levels of autonomy at work. And that surely isn't compatible. And I think that may have some explanatory power in helping us to understand some of the changes in workplaces which may have undermined people's sense of well-being. It's also clear that when you look at the data about how many people are doing jobs to which they're properly qualified, their skills match. The UK is worse than almost any other EU member state. About 20% of our workforce reports that they're more qualified for the job they're doing than is required by the job. So we have this mismatch problem. We know from the research that if people are underemployed, that's almost as bad for their psychological well-being as being put under too much pressure and having too much to do. So a combination of factors. If you're as old as me, you'll remember people in the 70s saying that technology was going to be something that would liberate us all. We'd all be working part-time. We'd all be having lots more leisure time. I'm not sure what happened, but it certainly hasn't delivered on that promise. And you could argue that rather than liberating us, technology has become an instrument of surveillance and control, and even breaking jobs up into smaller component parts. And I think that's a concern, and there's been quite a lot of research done on this, but it's certainly clear that in some occupations, in some sectors, how many people have got Blackberries on the desk? There you go. So you've got always-on technology, which means you've got an always-on job. And sometimes that's good for productivity, sometimes it's not. We also have to ask whether there's some forms of the way we organise work that's bad for people's health. So fragmentation of work into, as I said, its component parts or into bits of work processes, so people don't see things from start to finish, they just see a small part. There's some evidence that the growth in home working can be difficult for people in terms of social isolation, unless they're particularly disposed to that type of working. I think there are other ways that we organise work, partly facilitated through technology, that might not always be sustainable. The Workplace Employee Relations Survey, which has only in the last few years started to collect data on employees, suggests that in some sectors there are some high levels of job satisfaction, but there's more recent evidence that job quality in the UK is also declining. There's a survey that's done by the very elegantly named European Foundation for the Improvement of Living and Working Conditions in Dublin, which is part of the European Commission, which does a survey across all 27 member states every 2 or 3 years. And what it shows is that compared with most of our European competitors, we score pretty badly on most of the important measures of job content. So this is a proportion of employees who say their work involves monotonous tasks. And the UK, which is the white bar, the black bar is the EU average, is at the wrong end of that league table, nestling neatly between Latvia and the Czech Republic. The proportion of UK workers saying they have limited job control is at the wrong end of the league table, worse than Romania. The proportion of people who say they could have more opportunities to learn new things, i.e. the percentage of jobs that involve learning new things, again is below the EU average. And if you put all those together in a composite measure of job content, we pretty much come low down the list, and I think that is a real concern for a so-called knowledge economy. Our research at the Work Foundation shows that, depending how you measure it, 42% of the UK workforce is a knowledge worker. But if you've got knowledge workers with degrees not actually enjoying their work because the level of autonomy they have in their work is a problem, then I think we have a problem.